Well, good evening and welcome to another Auckland Deep Thinkers. Tonight, we're going to be talking about climate change. So that slightly controversial topic. And the point I've put is it an existential crisis, as we're led to believe, or is it a doomsday death cult? It seems like everything is blamed on climate change these days, from hot weather, cold weather, floods, droughts. But maybe we should ask some more challenging questions. So, do you think the world will really end in 2030? And that date is running up quite quickly. And only 6 years to go, or less than 6 years to go now. And we've seen these prophecies of doom come around every 10 years. The last one, of course, was the great 2012. The world is going to end because the Mayan calendar was about to end. This campaign, the environmental campaign and the global warming, climate change, net zero campaign, seems to have become a racket or even a scam. If you look at the information that's put out, they're wildly inaccurate and wildly hysterical. So do you think net zero is actually a good thing, or is it more likely to leave us all starving in the cold and dark? Because I think it's likely to be a recipe for disaster for any country to take on net zero. And you really need to challenge, what do you mean by net zero? Are we really facing an existential crisis? I mean, these scares come along every now and then, and they never really come to fruition. So people have been predicting the end of the world for centuries, and every time they've always been wrong. So should it really be our top priority? Are there more important things than climate change? These things need to be debated. And unfortunately, a lot of these things are not debated. A lot of debate on climate change is put down. It's put through to the younger generation. And now kids have climate anxiety and they think they're going to die of climate change. No, they're not. They're not going to die of climate change. And teachers are reporting that they have difficulty trying to deal with this student anxiety around climate change. And a lot of this anxiety around climate change is because of the propaganda around it that's been pushed towards these kids because they don't know any better. Their young minds are very easy to manipulate. Is there anything more privileged than a white girl who doesn't want to go to school until everybody else changes the weather just for her? The reason I'm a little bit skeptical, because I'm a bit old. And when I was a kid, the real problem was not global warming, it was global cooling. And articles like this, which appeared in 1979, warned us of the impending catastrophe of a forthcoming ice age. There will be a new ice age in our lifetime, and they were expecting it around the turn of the century, i.e. the year 2000. And the reason they all thought this is because global temperatures fell between 1945 and 1975. Year on year, each year was cooler than the previous year. And they extrapolated from that data and said, well, if this carries on, by 2000, the Arctic's going to be a lot bigger than it is now. So we were looking forward to a new ice age. We were also looking forward to the oil running out, definitely running out by 1990. Sadly, that didn't happen either. So we're being subjected to an unending stream of climate change propaganda. And so do a little research and you can dig out evidence that all of these claims that were predicted never turned up. And there's been 50 years of failed apocalyptic predictions. And why these apocalyptic claims about climate change are wrong. Basically, they're feeding some raw data in and coming out with hysteria. And here's a little fun thing you can do. Just pick a country and type into either Google or Bing, warming twice as fast. So here we are. Canada apparently is warming twice as fast as everywhere else. And you'll find lots of reports about that. Surely that must be unique. Oh, but no, Europe is warming twice as fast as everywhere else. The Arctic is warming twice as fast or faster than anywhere else in the world. Surely it must be limited to that. But no, the Antarctic is warming faster than the rest of the world as well. So the reporting of climate change is, shall we say, it leaves something to desire and something to hope for. So what you've got to realize is that climate is always changing. Some of the highest recorded temperatures, certainly in the 20th century, were in the early part of the 20th century, and in particular in what we call the Dust Bowl era. But, you cry, 97% of climate scientists agree. What did they agree on? They were asked basically three very simple questions. Is the world warmer than it was in 1990? Is CO2 a greenhouse gas? Do human activities produce CO2? Well, the answers, quite honestly, are all yes. It's quite simple. Yes, but the world is warmer than it was in 1900, but it's been a lot warmer and it's been a lot colder. Is CO2 a greenhouse gas? Yes, but there are other greenhouse gases, which some of them are more potent than CO2. The human activities produce CO2? Well, yes, but all life on Earth produces CO2 and other activities produce CO2. So delving deeply into the research that we're supposed to believe, what it comes down to is 77 respondents who describe themselves as climate experts responded yes. So 75 out of 77 is the 97%. So although they started with 3,146 responses, they narrowed it down even further to the people claiming to be climate experts. Some of the others of the respondents weren't scientists at all. But the media picked up on this 97%. So the whole of the climate agreement, this consensus, is based on 75 people. Now, nobody's denying that the world has got warmer since the 1800s because that was a particularly unusually cool period. There was a kind of mini ice age during the Victorian period. But what they didn't agree, what they haven't asserted, is that this warming is dangerous or action upon it is dangerous because they weren't asked. This is where you find the science. Basically, climate scientists or most scientists will give you the answer you're looking for. And if you fund them in a certain way and prohibit funding in another way, then you'll get the scientific consensus that the politician wants. So if you think you're following the science, guess who the science is following? Yes, scientists need funding. They need feeding, so they get their money to feed themselves. And they come out with lovely graphs like this. And we can be sure that just as the hockey stick graph was used and abused, here is a typical climate change kind of graph. And you've got to look at it going, shit, this is getting real. We must be really scary now. Time to sacrifice all freedoms for more security. But here's another graph. And this goes back millions of years. And it's based on ice core records. And you'll notice that the carbon dioxide levels have been a lot higher. And in particular, during the eras of the dinosaurs, and that's where we had a very green planet. And that's where we get a lot of our oil and gas from, that sort of period. So we're now hovering around the 400 parts per million level, but we have been a lot higher. And notice this is a log graph. And you've got to be careful about graphs as they often use log scales in a slightly devious manner. But you say this goes back millions of years. What about more recently? Well, here's another graph looking at from 1982 to 2012. And it's plotting the change in CO2 versus the change in temperature. And each case from peak to peak, the peak of the CO2 change follows the peak of the temperature change, not the other way around. Let's have a look at what's in the atmosphere. As most of you know, most of it is nitrogen. 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. The other, another 20% is oxygen. Now, hopefully nobody's stupid enough to say we need a zero oxygen level. Otherwise, we would all die. But coming down here, carbon dioxide. It's a colourless, odourless, tasteless gas. It's a natural part of the environment. It is not a pollutant, and it is currently around the 0.04% mark. And the amount in the atmosphere varies. But pushing for zero carbon dioxide is equally insane, because without carbon dioxide, there would be no life on Earth. But carbon dioxide and carbon is the basic building block of life. No carbon dioxide, no life. Diminished carbon dioxide, diminished life as well. Increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, abundant life. So it would be crazy to start eliminating carbon dioxide, and it's crazy to start thinking of it as a pollutant. Coming up here, methane is another so-called greenhouse gas, but look how tiny that is. It's not even in the parts per million, it's measured in parts per billion. And the other issue, it is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, but it does break down in the atmosphere into component parts and gets oxidized. Now, does anybody remember this from a couple of years ago? The Tonga volcanic eruption. This little thing, well, it wasn't so little, it was quite a bigger volcanic eruption. That spewed out more CO2 in about a week than the whole of New Zealand did, well, ever, basically. But not only did it spew out CO2, it also spewed out sulfur dioxide and an awful lot of ash and threw it high up into the atmosphere. That changes the planet. That changes the climate. To put it in perspective, there's the Tonga volcanic event, as they call it. The famous one is Krakatoa, which nearly put out 25 cubic kilometers of ash as well. And go back far enough to Taupo, that not just changed New Zealand, it changed the atmosphere as well. So these things are very important in the state of the climate and has a big impact on changing the climate. Something else that nobody seems to mention. We remember when I said that the world's temperature cooled between 1945 and 1975. And you should also remember that Greenpeace was established not really as an environmental group, but as a group to stop nuclear testing. Nuclear tests were going on from 1945, and this is the record of the number of tests between 1945 and 1996, and they got bigger and bigger. Now, fortunately, most of them were underground, but 528 of them were above ground until eventually the comprehensive test ban was signed. But nobody seems to mention this. So what do we call it? It used to be called, well, global cooling. Then it was global warming. Then it was climate change. Now it's climate disruption. Let's just call it weather. It seems to me that climate change and climate science is less science and more religion. One of the clues is if you try to disagree with it, people call you a non-believer and treat you like a heretic. And it goes along with a lot of propaganda. There's so much propaganda on climate change. How could you ever possibly push against it? And it's basically to break your will, stop you thinking critically, and to annihilate the truth. And I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. But why? Why have they doing this? Who benefits from all of this? Well, obviously, global problems need global solutions, and global solutions need global governance. And global governance needs a global government. Are you following? What's the real agenda? It's about population control in both senses of the words. So one is to limit the number of people on the planet and then to control how those people actually behave. So what if I told you that the carbon they actually want to reduce is you?